Today I am going to create a footer, the footer from Abercrombie and Fitch. This is an approximation of the footer. Actually, I'm not having the very same icons, but for the sake of practicing, it will just do. Let's go for it. I'm creating a blank project that I will call, let me see, AHZ. Here we are. And what I'm going to do next is to create a section that will contain two main areas, one for the top area and one for the bottom area. Now, inside that top area, I am going to have a grid system with a few columns that will follow this layout over here. Alright, something like that. And for this area on the bottom, I'm going to create a grid system, or perhaps a flex two-sides system that will consist of this left and right area. This one tool, let's go for that. So I'm dropping a div block that we'll call section AHC number 1, for which I'm going to have no margins. Let me just check my design to be sure about it. Okay, so I am not. I'm sorry. I'm having margins over here, approximately 20 pixels. Then again, this is an approximation of the design. This is the actual screenshot of the Abercrombie and Fitch footer. So I'll do a 20 pixels just for the sake of having something nearby of what we are having here. Now, instead of this element, I'm going to drop my two blocks. I'm going to call my two containers, and I'm going to call container AHC number 1, and another one that I will call number 2 via duplicating and renaming the item. Or, yes, renaming the item. So, in here, I will create a grid system. We'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. So let me just drop a div block over here and call this grid top AHC number 1. That will have a layout grid with 5 columns. Also, I'm having this grid system to have only one row. My container, I will have this to be centered. I will have to be 100% width, and also I'm limiting its size to approximately, or I will have roughly 1600 pixels. So in here, I will have a max width of 1600 pixels. And I'll have the same in here, centered width 100% with a max width of 1600 pixels. And there we are. Now back to my grid. In here, I am having two elements. I'm having this logo, and also I'm having those brands, CTAs in there. So I'm going to drop 5 div blocks that will correspond to each of my columns, and I will work one by one. I do not want all of those to have this very same class, because I want to have flexibility to make every single column a little bit different. So for my first column, I'll have a first call AHC number 1, or yes, that is just fine. Okay, I'm going to do 2 areas. So first cool top area, AHC number 1, and another one that I will duplicate and recall number 2. So this one over here will contain my logo. because if I assume my designer want to have this logo to be clickable, I'll have in here first column top logo or logo wrapper AHC number 1. This will be a link div or link block on which I will drop my picture element that I will call first cool logo AHC number 1. There we are. 22 pixels will be okay, I think. Yes, I believe that will be okay, but I will check anyways after having exported this. So having this as a very common and fetched logo, web export, and I am going to drop in my exported element. There we are. It seems like it is just fine. Maybe I will adjust a little bit the height of this element later on, but it is just fine for us as for now. Now, for the second element, I'm going to have a line that will create as a top border of this element in here. So I'm having a top border solid which one, and I'm having this color over here for which I will create a swatch that allows me to reuse that color later on. I'm having a little separation or margin. I'm sorry, I'm actually going to have the margin come from the element at the top, just for keeping consistency with how I usually proceed. This is of course nothing you are required to do. It is just sort of, I want to keep consistency on the way that I work with paddings and margins. So I'm adding 30 pixels more padding at the top of this element, and then I'll just drop off a div block that I will call first. Let me just check the design carefully. I'm having this wording that says or brands. Next I am having what is supposed to be 3. This is actually 3 logos. Yes, I mean the actual website is having those 3 as logos. So what I'm going to do here is to have a div block for the headline or the wording that says brands. First call brands headline. There we are. Instead of which I will have this text that says our brands. 13 pixels, I'm sorry. Yes, 30 pixels. First cool brands headline. AHC number 1, like this. 1.3 EM for the size of the element, and I'm having this bluish. It's sort of a black actually. I think I copied a. Yes, I accidentally copied it by color, so I'm using just plain black in here, perhaps, and this should be sort of a gray. Yes, it is not black, it is sort of a gray color. So I'm going to use this gray color over here, for which I'm having this swatch, and we are done with our brand in here. Perfect. Or maybe I'm just going to use the blue color for the sake of keeping consistencies. Yeah, that's what I will do here. I'll just replicate what my designer provided me with. That is an exercise that we were supposed to be doing if we were receiving this from a designer to recreate on Webflow. First call brands grid AHC number 1. So this secondary element over here in this bottom area of my first column, this that I'm having here, will be a grid. on which I will have my logos for brands like that, just like this. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, I accidentally assigned the style for the wrong element. Here we are. So this element over here will be a grid with one column that will contain this, and this logo. So what I'm going to do next is to export those logos in here. Next, because if I assume those logos are going to have a link block, I am going to create a link block as well to contain the actual pictures. So I'm having this called first call logo wrapper AHC number 2. I initially created one that is being at the top. This is what I'm naming it number 2 because I want this element not to share the same CSS label. I want this to be different in case I want this to have a different style or whatever. So inside of this element, I am going to drop a picture that will become into my logo like that. Let me just show you. So I'm having this logo over here, this odor over there, and finally I am having, let me just check, the Abercrombie and Fitch over there. Perfect. So I'm calling this first call logo AHC number 2. That will have 22 pixels height, maybe a little less. Yeah, it looks like this is a little smaller, so I'm going to have 16 pixels over here, and there we are. Now we're having 3 logos, so I'm going to duplicate those elements there. Next, I am replacing this with the actual logos that it should have over there. Now notice that we are having a background color that isn't exactly white. This is like a very dim gray. So on my section, the element that is the most global container of this footer, I'm having a color F6, 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 for which I will create a swatch to reuse it in the future if ever required. Following with my exercise in the column number 1, I'm going to check the distance between those logos. I'm having a 18 pixels distance. So I'm going to go to my grid, and I'm checking the distance between the columns, between the rows. This is 16. I'm having 18 instead. Just like that. Perfect. Next, I'm having a distance of 18 pixels as well between our brand's wording and the grid that follows. For the sake of, I'll just have 18 as well. That's perfect. Now I'm checking the distance above. I'm having 36. I previously had 30, so I'm going to have this 35. I like to use round numbers whenever possible. And finally, I'm noticing that I'm having this line border in the bottom area of this footer, which is this one over here. So for this container, I will have a div block that I will call bottom, let's say this wrapper AHC number 1, for which I'll have a border, top border style solid with 2 pixels, and I'm having this gray color over here. Perfect. Now, in between this container and the one that follows, I will have approximately 50 pixels. This is roughly 60 pixels, but I like to use round numbers, as I mentioned before. I'm having approximately 50 pixels as well over here. There we are. So it kind of looks closer now to what I am looking for with the footer. Let's work on this column. I'm having those two columns over here are basically similar. So I'm going to share the styles of, on them. What I'm going to do next is to create a column named second call AHC number 1, inside of which I will have a headline and a grid system for the items below it. So I'm going to have two divs, a headline that I will call second call heading AHC number 1, on which I'll have a text block that we'll call second call headline AHC number 1 that will say about us 15 pixels bold. So I'm using a about us 15 pixels 1.3 EM for the size of this text, and then having this to be bold. As for the color, I'm using this grayish blue over here, which I'm going to transform into a swatch. Now for the item below, I'm going to name this second call grid AHC number 1. And inside of it is that I'm going to have my links. So this will be transformed into a grid of 1 on the column. The distance between those elements is 18 pixels. So I'm going to have 18 pixels as the gap in between rows. And I'm going to drop a link block here, or maybe just let's do this quicker. I'm going to use a text link for those links in here that are 30 pixels like this. I'm going to call this second call grid. Second call link AHC number 1. It's going to have 30 pixels, 1.3 EM, and I'm going to have this bluish gray over there, for which I'm going to create a swatch. There we are. Now we're not having any underline, and this is regular, so make sure this is normal or regular, and the decoration is set to none. What follows is I'm going to check the distance between the about us and the grid below, and this is 22 pixels. So I'm going to use 22 pixels on the element that is at the top to separate it from the element that is below it, like that. Next, I'm going to copy and paste a lot of those items, and I'm going to copy and paste a few of them. Just try to see how it looks like with near real content. This is actually something that I recommend you to do when creating anything in Webflow. Just try to fill out things with content that is nearby or as equally as possible between the limits of efficiency to real content, so that you can check how lines are seen when having something real in here, rather than just having the very same lines everywhere, the very same text length everywhere, and thus not noticing if something gets broken because of a line is a little larger than you initially thought of, or something like that. Almost there with this last one. That is just perfect. Okay, so what I will do next, let's see this area over here is supposed to be aligned towards the bottom of this column, like this, so that if this grows up to the bottom, this will follow that growth rate. So what I need to do is the following. First, I'm going to set this first column that I created to be a layout flex. I will align this to vertical. Okay, and now I'm going to have my first element to have a sizing of growth to 1 and shrink to 0. What I'm telling Webflow to do over here is that, hey Webflow, I want A1 indicates Webflow. Hey Webflow, have this element to take as much as you can of this column. And when I'm with this 0 and shrink, I'm telling Webflow, hey, do not get this element smaller than its content inside. So if I'm having this logo that is 22 pixels, I'm telling Webflow this block over here cannot become smaller than 22 pixels, just in case. So that is basically how it works. Now finally, let's check the distance between this column and this column over there is roughly 40 pixels. So I am going to have 40 pixels as the gap in between columns. There we are. Now, what is next? I mentioned that this help column is basically a clone of this when it comes to styling. So I'm just going to duplicate that, and that's it. I'm having my second column created. I'm just going to copy and paste the content so it looks like what I am having on my design over there in XD. Thank you for your patience on being with me during this copy and paste boring exercise. But I want just to deliver to you something that is similar to what I'm having on my XD design. Almost there. So at this point, I do not consider this to be actually something useful at all if you're working with this for someone. But I'm only doing it because of I'm uploading this video to YouTube, and I want your materials to be as clean as I could possibly provide it with to you. Okay, let's work on my third column. So what I'm having here, I can make a grid system to build this first, second, third, and fourth column. Notice that I'm having a icon and a text element with each column, and this one over there is a little more complex. I am going to build this functionality. I'm sorry, I'm not going to build this functionality. This is obviously something you will have to code, or your developer will have to code, assuming you're not the developer as well. But I will deliver my developer this interface either with a div system or maybe two overlapped images. In this exercise, I think I will do the two div elements. So let's do it. I'm naming this as, let me see, third col AHC number 1, and inside of this column I'm going to have my grid. So first col grid AHC number 1. This grid system will have one column and will have 40 pixels, roughly 40 pixels separation in between elements. So my gap will be 40 pixels. There we are. And I'm having a div block inside of it that I will call third col. Let me call this item AHC number 1. Oh, I committed a mistake naming this clause. I'm naming it first column. It should be third column. Sorry about it. Okay, so this item element will have a display. Will have a display flex or horizontal aligned to center and justified to the left. That will contain, let me see, it will contain a div block that will call third call item left AHC number 1, and that basically will contain my icon. Well, and the second one will contain the text string. So the second one, I'll call it item right. What I did here is to duplicate and rename the class. This is often useful for you to improve your efficiency when creating. So inside of this right element, I'm going to drop up my text element. I'm going to call third call item text AHC number 1, just like that. And then I'm going to call gift cards. There we are. Now this element over here, what I'm going to do is to check the distance in between the left side of this container and the text, and I am having 36 pixels width. So I am going to do 36 pixels width over here. Approximately, I'm going to actually do 20, let's say 20 pixels width over here plus 16 pixels of margin space towards the right. And the reason behind this is I want to have an icon to be fitting inside of this element that I will call third call item icon AHC number 1. Now those in here are those icons that I was referring to previously. I'm going to upload those in here. Just checking. There we are. Nice. So I'm having a credit card in here. So for the icon container, I'm going to have a flex align and justify towards the center, just to make sure that the icon is properly aligned. And this being done, I'm going to copy and paste 3 times my elements. I almost forgot about providing color to this text over here. I'm going to use this bluish color. There we are. So this is named Find a Store. This over here is named Feedback. And this one over here is named High Contrast. But this one over here is having a different layout. So let me work that out. I'm going to have a div block dropped up over here that will call third column. How may I call this out? High contrast. AHC number 1. That's it. Okay, so this is a element for this high contrast. So everything inside, I will call it high contrast, just for the sake of being able to find that out what this is if you're reading through the elements in the code or in the navigator. So for this element, we're having a flex layout. There's going to have a horizontal justify space between and aligned to center over here. In the left, I am going to add a high contrast left element. At the right, I'm going to have a right element. Let's name this third column high contrast right element. Perfect. Now, inside of the left element, I'm going to drop off a text element like this. That will call text. This will be 16 pixels, I think. Let me just check this out. 15 pixels. 15 pixels, 1.3 EM. And this is going to be blue. And it will say high contrast, high contrast. Now the element over here, I mentioned I will have a approach of using divs for creating this. So this is what I'm going to do. Let's create a div that will name high contrast controller. Let's call it controller number 1. That is going to have roughly 54 pixels width, and 28 pixels height. That is going to have a radio that is going to cover the entire element, so I'm going to drop off a high number over there just for the sake of future-proof if I'm making this element bigger on Webflow. Okay, and also I'm having a border with this bluish color like that. 1 pixel for the border, that's it. I'm going to have a fill that is white color and almost there. Now I'm going to have a display horizontal center and justified to the right in here because of the element, the child element that I'm going to create next is going to use that style when in default state. So the child element will be named controller ball, and this will be, let me just check, this is roughly 18 pixels, so I'm having 18 pixels for the size of this element. This is entirely rounded, so my radius will be bigger than the size of that element. And for the color, I'm have this blue color over there. Now for the container of that ball, I'm going to have a roughly 4 pixels. Yeah, 4 is just fine. 4 pixels for padding, and there we are. It's almost there. Now maybe we'll like to deliver our developer with this subclass that says active or something like that. Okay, that will tell this element to be aligned justified to the end like that. Okay, and we'll tell, I don't know, via chat or a document, hey developer, if you consider that to be useful, you can set up a active subclass in this element to realign this child container. But of course that is something you will find with your developer depending on what the developer is telling you that is best for her or him to do. Now finally, we're having the cursor for this contrast controller to be pointer, because if we want users to notice that this is actually clickable. At this point you might tell, okay, but you can actually have an interaction that triggers out this functionality of realigning this element if you build this differently. Maybe not with a flex, but anyways, you make this to move towards the right. But the reality is that because of it is likely you will be exporting this code for a developer to integrate with another platform, or maybe this is going to work on Webflow, but your developer will have to work on a lot of coding for making this entire website to change from dark to light. Well, the developer will find easier to just code this interaction rather than having to deal with the code that Webflow produces for when you create a element trigger interaction like this one in here. But then again, this is something you will have to talk with your developer, but it's outside what this particular exercise is supposed to do. We're just building the visual layout, all right? So let's go for our final column over here. Let's call this, let me just think about it, third, by the way, I just wrote the third round in here, third column. So this will be our fourth column, AHC number 1. on which we'll have a formula for subscribing people. So I'm going to drop 4 elements, or maybe just 3. I'm going to have an element at the top for this subscribe text. Next, I'm going to have my form. Next, I'm going to have this grid. Yeah, 4 elements will do. I'm having my grid and have this notice for additional details, and then I'm having my grid for those social icons. So let me just get started by adding a form block over here. We'll call call form block number 1. I'm going to delete everything inside because I like to work on a blank canvas. So let me go towards this element and call it fourth colon form EHC number 1. Now inside of it, I'm going to add my 4 items like that. By the way, the form block is on Webflow is having a 15 pixels margin at the bottom by default. Just you can just set it to 0. It's kind of annoying that they get you things by default into the HTML classes because of you might prefer just to have something blank, right? But it depends on your personal taste, of course. Okay, 4th column form first AHC number 1. And for speeding up the process, I'm going to duplicate the classes and rename them like this. So this will be number 3, and this over here will be my number 4th. There we are. Next, let me just get this done, starting by with this subscribe headline, which is 15 pixels, and it is bold and slightly black. So I'm dropping a text over here. We'll call 4th column form first. No, a lot of text. Headline AHC number 1. Then we'll have 15 pixels, 1.3 EM for the size. This will be slightly black, I think. Now this is like this bluish black that I have used previously. This is bold. It will be named subscribe. Now the distance between this element and the following one is approximately 18 pixels. So I'm using 18 pixels to separate those elements. Next, I'm going to add a grid system, or yeah, maybe a grid will do, or maybe let's experiment with this one. This will be a flex system that will be named 4th call form fill wrapper number 1. Now this will be having a flex layout, horizontal justify, on which I will drop first my input field over here. So let me call this 4th column input field HC number 1. And next I'm going to have my button, submit button over here that we'll call 4th column form field. No, sorry, I'm gonna call this button HC number 1. So those elements are 65 pixels height. So I'm having this 65 pixels height, and this will be 65 pixels height as well. Notice Webflow is having a default margin of 10 pixels at bottom. I'll just set that to be 0. Okay. So what else do we have here? We're having a grayish border of 1 pixels over here, no radius. So I'm going to recreate that in here for almost all of the borders except for the right border. The right border, I'll set this to be none for borders styles. Next, we're having a 15 size text over here that will have slightly moved towards the right. 15 pixels, 1.3 em for the text size, and I'm having this to be bluish. And for the color bluish to take the placeholder, I'm going to go towards the selector, click this arrow, and select the placeholder state. In there is that I'm going to use my color. Let me just check this out. This is sort of a light bluish color, and this is saying email address. Perfect. This is supposed to be an email field, and we're almost there. This is named join, and it is having a 000 plain black color. So for the background, I'm using a plain black color. For the text, I'm using a 13 pixels color over here, and this is wide, by the way. This is saying join, and we're having a little spacing over there, like that. Yes, that is just going to suffice. I'm having a bold style, by the way. There we are. And we're having a little more margin over here, sort of. Let me just check this out. Roughly 35, I'll use 35 in here. Perfect. Very nice. Now, I want this element to have a minimum size of 250 pixels. So my minimum size will be 250 pixels over here on desktop. And there we are. It seems like it is done, right? Yes, it definitely is having it is just taking shape over here. Now let's work on this text string that I'm having below. Because of that, I'm having this small link in here. I'll use a standard text block over here. Okay, and copy that and paste that. And use a insert link item over here. Okay, so what are we going to do is name this fourth column toggle line AHC number 1, and we're going to set this to be 30 pixels, 13 pixels, 1.3 em. It's kind of a bluish color. And for the link, we're having a class to be named fourth toggle line link AHC number 1. That is going to have as well this bluish color, and it's going to stay with a underlined decoration. Now the distance between this element at the top and one at the bottom is 15 pixels. So I'm going to go towards the element that is containing, or that is separated from the element below, and I'm going to set the margin in there to be 15 pixels towards the bottom. Similarly, we're having roughly 15 pixels from this text element towards the icons that are below, so I'm going to use 15 pixels again. Perfect. Now let's get those icons here exported. There we are. And let's create inside of here a grid will be probably fine, I think. Yes, I think a grid will do. So I'm going to create a grid named fourth grid AHC number 1 that is going to have a grid with only one row and maybe 5 columns. 5 columns, perfect. On which I will drop up a link block to contain the icons that we'll call fourth call icon link, AHC number 1, and inside of it I'm going to actually drop my icon. So I'm going to have a picture element named fourth call icon pick AHC number 1, for which I'm going to set the size to be approximately 22 pixels, or yes, 22 pixels I think will do. So inside of that I'm going to add my icons. Let me just get those imported into the Webflow system like that. Perfect. So I'm starting with Facebook, and next I am going to, let me just see this. Okay, actually I'm not going to use display grid, I'm going to use display flex, aligned towards the left or the start and to the center, so that my elements do not get shrinked, which I will make sure not happen if I set shrink to be 0 on the child element of this grid. Next I'm going to have my elements duplicated, and I'm going to add a little bit of margin towards the left. I think 40 pixels will be sufficient. So then I'm having Twitter, then I'm having Pinterest, then I'm having Instagram, and finally I am having what's left? YouTube. Perfect. There we are. Now let's work on our final element on this design, that is this bottom area of the footer. Now this area over there is having two sub areas, one at the right and one at the top, and we're going to do that with a grid. So we're having a bottom grid, AHC number 1, with only one row, 2 columns will do. And actually I'll set this one column to be outer, so that it adjusts to the little text that is going to be placed in here. Perfect. Now instead of this, I'll have a div block, or 2 div blocks, that will name bottom left AHC number 1 and bottom right AHC number 1. Perfect. And inside of it, I will either use a grid, or in this case perhaps I will use a flex container for those links that are inside. So let me get this to have a flex container that we'll call bottom left grid, or flex, or yes, a grid will do, even if we're not having a grid. Grid is sort of for me at the very least an indication of we're having a listing of items. AHC number 1, we're having a flex layout aligned towards the center, justified to the start, and I'll select wrap, because if I want this to inherit the property that will make those elements to go like this if we are on mobile. I mean, if our screen gets smaller than this row of containers of elements. So this being done, I will add now a link block, or maybe a div block, a standard div block, to contain the items. I'm going to call this bottom left items AHC number 1. So this will contain my items, and this will contain as well this little line that is over there. That is 1 pixel and this sort of gray color. 15 pixels towards the element itself, 20 pixels towards the right. So I'm having 15 pixels margin padding in here and 20 pixels margin towards the right. Also, because if I want this properties to be inherited, I'm going to add 15 pixels towards the bottom. I'll show you why in a few seconds. Now for the border right, I'm having a style solid 1 pixel width and this gray color for this margin or this sort of line border. I'm going to drop, oh, I lost it. I am going to drop my link in here, right? Then we'll call bottom left link AHC number 1. That is going to have, let's check those out, 12 pixels size, 1.3 em, and this bluish color that is going to be underlined for the curation, and that is going to say privacy add cookies. And also it looks like this text over here is kind of having a negative letter in space. I'll have this to be 0.3 perhaps. Okay, that's it. Anyways, we're not using the actual font of this website because this is just an exercise. You can totally change out the font if you will ever replicate this or just build your own footer, and your designer will totally like use that or that other font, and they will actually give you the font. So for this practice and exercise, I think this will do. 30 pixels is distance that we have to follow in here. That will set to be on the bottom wrapper like that. 30 pixels, perfect. And now we'll like this to have, let me just check this out. Perfect. What else would like? We'll like to be this. Okay. Perfect, we are done in there. Now, I'll just duplicate those elements a few times to create this sort of layout that I'm having on my design example. And I'm going to copy and paste those elements for the sake of replicating this on this exercise. Okay, that's a lot of links. We're having two left links only. So I'm almost there, and this one is the last one saying side map. Phew. And you'll notice that this last element is not having those lines. So for this last final element, I'm having a subclass that says last element, for which I'm having the distance be, the margin be 0, and also I'm having, yes, the margin be 0, and this border to be inexistent. There we are. Now, for this area, we're having something quite similar, but at the same time is different. We're only having one element, very similar to that element that we previously created. And for this second element, we're having an icon. So here's how we will do. We're having a something that says sort of I'll just follow what I wrote here. This was named bottom grid, bottom left. Instead of bottom left, I had bottom left grid. So I'm going to call this bottom right grid AHC number 1. For this, I'm going to have a flex layout displayed justified towards the end and certain aligned towards the center. And actually, I am going to just cut a little path with copying and pasting one of those elements in here. This over here will become my first element, right? However, I do not want those elements to be connected in terms of the class's name. I want this to be different because of if I modify something around here, like having this line to go towards the left instead of being at the right, I want only to affect this element, not 9 elements on this page. And because of that, I will duplicate the class and rename it. And I will rename it accordingly to my situation. This is a bottom right item. And I will do similarly with the element or the link element that is inside of it. I'm going to rename this to be my bottom right link. And there we are. Now it says just change. And I will modify this spacing and margin, and I'm having this spacing and margin to be changed towards the left, like this. Also, I'm having this change to be moving towards the right, to the left border, like that. And that's it. Oh, and it seems like this is using the slightly dimmer blue color, so I'm going to use that blue color in here. And also, it seems like it is using a slightly dimmer gray for this line, so I'm changing that as well in here. There we are. A lighter gray. So, what is following here? We are going to create, we're having this bottom right container to be a layout, flex, justify end, and align center. And we are going to create a container for this link with a sort of icon over here. So let's drop up our element. Let's place it at the beginning of this bottom right container, and let's name this bottom right languages wrapper. Yes, that's probably a useful name for this. So instead of that wrapper, we'll have a link block that will contain our element over here. Then we'll call bottom right languages, I don't know, languages link number 1. Oh, by the way, I will just fix this name. This shouldn't be like with lang of languages. There we are. Now, I'm going to drop a text element inside as well as I will drop a picture. You can do that with a background, by the way, but I just made it this way. It's kind of the same in this scenario, perhaps. So for the container or the link element, I'm going to create a flex layout justified to end and aligned to the center for having those to be a icon at the left and text at the right. So I'm going to call this bottom right icon AHC number 1. That is going to be approximately 14 pixels height, like this, and that is going to have a approximate 15 pixels margin towards the right, like that. Now for this text block, I'm having a class to be named bottom right languages text AHC number 1 that is going to have 30 pixels, height to be set to 1.3 em, and that is going to be blue, and that is going to have decoration none. Oh, the decoration none is actually be set on the link, otherwise it will not work. So decoration none for the link. And next I will export this element. Desktop export PNG is going to work. Here we are. There we are. Perfect. English, United States. Sorry. United States. Okay. So what are we missing over here? So in here we're having this 15 pixels towards the bottom that will delete, and there we are. Now you'll notice I previously set 15 pixels for this element. The reason why is I want this to be inherited to the mobile variations that we are going to build in a while. And because of that, because if I added 15 pixels margin, I'm adding a negative 15 pixels margin to the container element. I'll tell you more about it within a few seconds. Now let's check this out. It seems like it is working. Perfect. Now let's go for mobile. For mobile it gets pretty interesting because the layout is not having everything accordingly to what our designer delivered us. And remember, this is just a thought exercise. This is not something meant to be accurate or anything like that. Just let's have this for fun and practice. So I'm just going to work on my tablet's breakdown now. Okay, what do we have here? Remember about this children wrap property and the minus 15 pixels with the 15 pixels border margin at the bottom for those elements? Well, here's why. If I won't have 15 pixels, all the elements will be like that. And I just like to set elements to be inherited whenever possible, because that makes things easier and the code is just more manageable if you're having less properties to do the same. Okay, so we're kind of almost done over here with our bottom area, but I will just realign this to the top in here so that it kind of follows a pattern with those elements that are at the left. Now over here I'm having this grid for which I will delete a few columns so that the elements realign accordingly. I'm having 20 pixels gap in between here. I think that will be better. Also, I'm having 14 pixels gap for rows, and it kind of looks okay, I believe, but maybe I could even do better if I have 4 columns. By the way, we're just improvising over here because we were not delivered with the specifications by our designer, but it will do. So what do we have here? I want this 4th element to take the fullness of the rows for this layout, and there we are. It's working. Yes. Now let's go towards the mobile landscape. This logo is getting shrunk a little bit, so maybe what it could do is to have this to become a little better organized by removing 1 column and by setting up this 4th column to be 3 spans maybe, but I'm actually not liking how it looks right now, so let me try something different. I'll try out maybe that will work better, perhaps. What if we will have 2 columns? Or maybe we have 3 columns over here. And this one comes to the last element. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is to have minimum width for this to be 0 again, so that these elements is not forced to stretch up to the entireness of the space on this column. And following, I'll just have these subscribe thing to become the last one in this design, like that, to adopt this over here. Maybe I'm having 40 pixels for columns again, just for this particular layout, and that's it. I mean, it's not perfect, but given that this is just a thought experiment in which we're not having the design, we're not UI designing over here, it will work. Following, I'll work on this layout. Now, if we were not having any specification about how will that look like on a small mobile screen, I will definitely leave this as it is right now because of, well, maybe not as it is, because I will definitely fix this out to be 1 column over here, and maybe this to be aligned towards the start, but it will definitely have something just like this instead of that. However, we want to practice, right? So let's go for something like this. So the first thing we'll notice is we're having the logo at the start, and we're having our logo here in this let's see, first column. So what I'm going to do is to hide this second column by displaying known, because of we're having 2 classes named second column. Both of them are hidden automatically. Now, if my third column is not having anything, I will keep either. So I'm going to set this to be hidden as well. However, we're having a about and help, 2 elements about and help. So those about and help are right over here. I'm going to rethink my strategy. I'm going to hide now those grids so that only the about and help are the elements that are shown like this. I'm going to set my spacing to 0 for those 2 elements, and I'm having my first column to become order first again. There we are. Following, I'm having this 4th column to take a 1 column spine space and have next going to go to towards my grid and layout, and I'm going to delete one of those columns to have only 1 column like that, just for getting a little order in here. Now, what is next? I already have my Abercrombie and Fitch logo at the beginning. Let's get this centered. Next, I am going to have this line to be deleted. So I'm going to go to my top area, first column top area, borders. I'm going to set this to none, and I'm going to delete this padding over here. Next, I'm staying only with the about and help elements. So all this is gone. All of this over here and this say first column top area is going to be gone by displaying known property. The about us that is just below it. Oh, by the way, I'm having margins over here. No, okay. My about is going to be centered, as well as the help element will be. No, my grid system is going to be reduced to 20 pixels for rows. Let me just check the distance between those 2 elements. It is 20 pixels. And let me just check this as well. We're having roughly 20 pixels, perfect. but my distance between those two elements is 30 pixels. So I'm going to check what I'm having here, this add in pixels, additional pixels. So it is this one over here. I'm going to set this to be 0, and for the first column only, I'm going to set a margin to be 10. Set 10 plus 20 of the grid that I'm having here adds for 30. Next, I'm having my email address link here. I'm not having anything else but the margins, and this third column over here will be hidden entirely. The subscribe wording will be hidden entirely. The distance between help and this formulary thing will be 40 pixels. So I'm going to move a second column, or because I don't want to change the size, the margins for those two elements that are sharing the same class. I'm going to my third column, or my fourth column, sorry, that is contained in this form, and I'm going to add 20 pixels margin to the bottom, to the top. Next, I'm checking that this element over here is roughly 42 pixels height. So I'm having 42 pixels height in here, as well as I'm having that in here. This black color, whoa, something happened. Hope that to be a non-fatal emergency. Fatal emergency, I'm sorry. Okay, so my email address text will become this size over here. Oh, I definitely hope nothing extremely dangerous have happened. Hopefully that will not become any sort of fatality. Let's hope for that. Okay, so back to my exercise. I'm having this border line of 2 pixels over here. So what I'm going to do next is to get this message hidden, right? And for my fourth element in this grid, for column, I am going to add a little bit of padding. Let's just check this design. We're talking about 30 pixels to the top and 30 pixels to the bottom. So I add in 30 pixels to the bottom and 30 to the top, with a border at the top with 2 pixels and a color CCCCC, like that. Perfect. Now those elements over here are supposed to be aligned. So what I'm going to do next is to delete this margin towards the right, set this to be a small margin of 10 pixels towards both the right and the left, and finally I will align this from justify start to justify space around, like that. That's it. And maybe I'm going to add a little padding towards the right and the left, like this. Perfect. Now, what is left? I'm having this United States and change elements in here. So what I'm going to do is to get all this hidden, all the bottom left area hidden, and also I'm going to justify towards the center this element over here. Now, this is 30 pixels, this is 30 pixels, so I'm going to set this with 30 pixels. 1230, perfect, and we're done. Yes, apparently we're done. Let me just check this out. Yes, it looks like we are just done in here. Maybe we will have a quick check. Oh, we are not done. I missed this border to be deleted and to adjust the space in between those icons and this links to 30 pixels. So I'm having this fixed right now. Let me just do that. Okay, so I'm in this space over here. And also I am adjusting this spacing over here to be 30. And that's it. Apparently we are now done. So let's publish and check this very quickly on a browser. Let me enter into responsive mode and check this out. Okay, so here's how it looks like for desktop, iPad, tablets. Okay, see how those elements in here are adjusted with this wrapping children wrap property that we used. We're having this for iPhone to work very nicely, I think. Yes, that's it.